There you go.
All right, we are ready. So it's 5 p.m., so I'm calling the May 9th Commissioner meeting of the Plymouth Village Water and Sewer District to order. And let us begin, please, with approving minutes of April 11 and April 25.
Make a motion that we approve the minutes of April 11 and April 25.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Sir?
Yep, I too.
Okay. On to payroll and manifests. We have a payroll and manifest in front of us. A motion, please, to approve it.
I'll make that motion.
I'd second it.
All those in favor of approving the payroll and manifest?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, on to new business. First item on the agenda, chairs in the conference room.
Okay,
Coming from the chair, wanting to know about chairs.
okay, so, I thought the chairs were kind of uncomfortable. If you guys don't want to go that way, that's fine. I bought a couple of samples because we have them at home. I think that people may enjoy them. They could probably use an upgrade in the office too. I don't know how long we've had those chairs, but I think they're terrible uncomfortable. But
Well, there's a time for replacing everything, so certainly willing to consider it. Thoughts?
I'm comfortable with what we have. I've been sitting in them now for 5 years,
Right.
and I don't have an issue. If it was somebody in the office that needed a chair, I'd be right on top of it and say yes. But I sit here for what, an hour a month?
Yes.
So I don't think it's a real problem.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. I mean,
Okay.
I'm happy that you brought in your own.
yeah, well, I might just leave one here for myself.
Yeah, that's fine.
Fine.
Okay,
Well, I'm certainly willing to.
what's the date today? The 9th?
Today is the 9th, yes. Well, let's keep moving on. At 5:15, we have a presentation by Raftelis, David Fox, so we can get a few more things in. The Union Bank interim financing renewal of the sewer loan. This loan is coming due. We couldn't know how long our projects were going to take, so we're proposing to extend the term of this loan by 1 year, as I understand. So I will need a motion to renew the interim financing and to authorize Kim to assign the agreement letter.
I'd move a motion that you just made.
Yes, all right, so specifically, the original loan amount was $5.225 million. Current loan balance is $2,543,811. And
The interest rate at the bottom is 4.49.
Yeah.
right, 4.49 fixed.
Okay. You know, it raised the question, like, with interest rates on such a steep decline, is that going to affect our projections?
No, we actually...
All of the bonds and all of the stuff that government
We
funded?
met with Wright Pierce, and this interest can come out of the USDA funding. Interest is covered in allowed categories, and
Okay.
we are still within the budget of projected interest with that. Yep.
So you don't think that's going to be a problem with
I
any
do
of
not
that
think
budget?
that-
We had a heck of a deal on the first time.
The first one,
Yeah.
yeah,
Very good.
1.8, but they are going up higher, obviously, but there's only a 12, and we actually have the potential to close it out sooner than a year.
Okay.
So hopefully we'll spend less interest than
Right, so we chose a year just to be on the conservative side to
cover
make sure
to the
that we were
very end in case
of-
something was lagging, but
in the,
Yeah.
in the construction. So, with the details of the loan, you Paul,
I would move that we allow you, Bob and Kim to sign the Union Bank interim financing renewal.
Thomas,
You.
second on that?
Yep, I second that.
All those in favor of this?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, all in favor, good.
if you want to wait, Chris, we could sign everything at the end if you want to move through just the motions of...
Oh, okay, yeah, right, so we also have,
There's 3 copies each to be signed of the legal documents that go along with approving that loan.
right, so this is the,
That's the agreement, and then Bob needs to sign the IRS forms.
right. So should we amend the motion there to just,
Include those.
yeah.
Yep.
So I motion that we amend that motion to include authorizing commissioners and treasurer to sign the amendment to the general obligation bond anticipation note, and then also for Bob to sign the IRS 8038G information returns that are related to the loan.
I move that amended motion.
Yep, second that.
All those in favor of amending the motion?
Aye.
Aye, okay. So now let's sign away here. Well, that's for that would be in Kim's department. We all need, let's see these. All right, so we each need to sign a copy of these. 3 lines there. Hand that over to you, sir.
One, treasurer?
I have to sign this
Yeah,
one?
yeah.
2, 3, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
sounds very good.
Okay.
All right.
Whoops.
Sorry, we'll get it at the end.
Last page is the treasurer.
They're all the same, for that document, they're all on the same line, on the same page.
Okay.
And then you, and then pass that one on to Bob.
Right.
Notarized on the back. I saw the third line on the back.
Okay. So likewise
Sure
with
it
that,
is.
sign and pass to your right.
Did that one have a treasurer on it?
This one does.
No, this does not. That means you there, and then I'll pass that one to Tom.
Sign your life over, Bob.
Yeah, I'm the one. So
Let's
that
go
one
down.
goes down there.
This just goes to
correct.
Bob.
So that goes to you for signature. And we're good there.
Your one.
Oh, that goes to Kim now. All right. All right, so while Bob is signing those, there we go, those are the other 2.
Okay.
Do you want to move these along?
That needs your autographs, sir. Yes.
Hey, good evening, Dave.
Good evening, everybody.
Hello.
Good evening, David. Well, yeah,
A little bit early, I think.
yeah,
but
you
I figured
are
I'd jump
just
on.
a smidge early. I guess we can, I'd say let's just go ahead and, oops, treasurer. Yeah, that goes, these 2 need to go over your way. We'll be with you in just a moment.
That goes to the top.
Take your time, no problem
Yeah.
at all.
Do you want me to hand over the host to you, Dave?
Top, I'm missing them.
Yes, there you are.
No, I think this is going to be more discussion-based, me asking some questions and writing down a bunch of notes. So I think this forum is perfect.
Okay, great.
Oops, I got in the wrong spot, sorry.
Well, you can
Doesn't
just, why
matter.
don't you go ahead and, oh, it doesn't matter?
I don't think it matters, as long as everybody's signature is on there.
Maybe you can cross out treasurer and write commissioner afterwards, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just do the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so there are all of those for you.
Sorry about that one. I just elevated.
I just went up the list, that's all.
I just elevated it.
It's like,
Got a promotion.
I was gonna say, is there a pay raise to go with that or not?
No, it's just a motion.
Question.
Okay, there we are. All right, so it's about 5:10, but let's turn the attention now to David Fox of Raftellus, who we've hired for a rate and financial study for the district, and we eagerly await hearing what you have to say, David, so welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's good to be with you this evening. My name is Dave Fox. I'm a vice president at Raftellus. I lead our Northeast operations. I'm sure you're probably aware, but Raftellus is the largest firm in the country, predominantly focused on water and sewer rate and financial related issues. And we've been brought on, as was just mentioned, to perform a financial and rate study. We've done a good amount of work in data digging and data analyses thus far. And before we get too far down the road of providing you with formal recommendations. We wanted to have this discussion to understand from your perspective what the concerns and objectives are, such that we can take those into consideration when making recommendations. Obviously, we will provide those recommendations with our expertise and best practices and things like that, but nobody knows your system and your customers like you do. Certainly not us. We know rates and finances very well, but you know you better than we do, and we want to understand what those concerns are, such that we can make the best recommendations to fit your needs the most. So I think maybe to start, unless you tell me this is not worthwhile, just kind of walking through, what it is exactly we're doing, the scope of work, and then I can get into some questions to maybe kick the conversation off. But if you don't think that's necessary, if you all have a good understanding of what it is we're doing already, I can skip that piece.
No, I think we have been engaging with this topic for some time, and I certainly, Paul to my right and myself are quite aware. Tom probably less so.
I'm good. Yep.
You're good? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd say proceed, please.
So I guess maybe just let me then, there's kind of two key components of what we're doing. I won't get into the detail. I'll just start the conversation. Two key components. One is what I'll refer to as financial planning. That is looking at what your long-term revenue requirements are over a 5 to 10 year period. Once you get out that outside of that 5-year window, things get a little hazy. We like to focus on those first 5 years, but certainly understand what's coming in the latter 5 years of a forecast. Trying to determine how much money needs to get generated on an annual basis to not only fully finance your operating expenses, your existing capital obligations, and what is going to be a significant driver of rates going forward, and always is for every water and sewer utility across the country, is renewal and replacement and reinvestment into your system and financing the additional capital improvements that you have over the next 5 to 10 years. Again, primarily focusing on the next 5 years. Asking the question, when do projects, we have your CIP already lined up, or need to have some discussions, probably internally with staff around the timing and how we're going to pay for those projects, because that can obviously make a big difference in terms of the annual costs associated with that, right? So you can imagine if you have a $1 million project, if we think of two just very high level, very common methodologies for financing capital improvements, one being pay-go or cash financing versus debt financing, the need for rates in any given year will be significantly higher if you, significantly more if you paid for that $1 million project all out of cash. You have to generate $1 million in cash to pay for that project outright, rather than debt financing that project, and yes, potentially paying interest over the life of the loan, but spreading out those costs and amortizing them over a longer period of time, which is very common in the industry for paying for assets that are going to last a long period of time, not to overburden the ratepayers. So determining, how much money needs to again get generated annually, not only those operating expenses but those capital costs as well, and compare that against your existing revenue stream and how we think that revenue stream might change over that exact same forecast period, and understand simply how much more the revenue needs to increase to be able to support the revenue requirements on an annual basis. Now, that is just one core component, which is basically what are the across-the-board rate increases, the percentage increases that you need to be able to support financial sufficiency annually. We also take into consideration like reserve fund balances, right? Everybody on this call should have a savings account. Water and sewer funds are no different, to try to mitigate the potential volatility associated with volatility in consumption. Cool, wet spring, summer, falls, when consumption declines, revenues decline accordingly with a volumetric revenue base. Our capital improvements that we don't have
Oops. David, we've lost your connection. It's a hard media.
Oops.
Oh,
No, you probably reboot.
yeah.
Coming back on.
you have to allow him in, or he's still there?
No, he's still there.
You all hear me?
Yes,
Now.
yes,
Now we can.
Can you hear me?
yes.
Yep,
Yes.
Okay, I got kicked out somehow, but here I am. I can't see you, but you can hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
yes.
All
Yes.
right, well, I'll just keep dialing ahead then. I was saying reserve fund balances. Okay, great. So taking those into consideration, just making sure we have enough on hand for potential what ifs that pop up out of nowhere, new regulations, something of that regard. So making sure we're forecasting that in the financial plan. That's really one key component, is the financial sufficiency of both the water and the sewer funds. The other key component at a very high level is, once we understand how much revenue you need to generate on an annual basis, the question becomes, how should you generate those revenues? So the simplest thing that could be done is just taking your existing rate structure and doing the across-the-board increases. So if the results of the study say you need 5% additional revenue on an annual basis, you can increase your rates and charges by 5% annually, and that will recover that additional revenue. But there are also additional rate structures that we could potentially look at, fixed charges, fire protection charges, things of that nature that will alter the way in which you're recovering revenue on an annual basis, and will ultimately have varying impact on different types of customers. Anytime you make a structural change to your rates and your revenue recovery, there will be winners and losers just based on that structural change alone. Even if you're not increasing your revenue at all, or the amount of revenue, there will be winners and losers just from a structural change. For example, if you were to implement a significantly high fixed charge, that is great from a revenue stability standpoint, right? So the fixed charges do not change based on the amount of water customers are consuming. So if you have volatility in your consumption, you still have the exact same amount of revenue coming from fixed charges. What those fixed charges typically do, though, is they disproportionately impact lower volume customers compared to higher volume customers, because that fixed charge is a greater portion of those lower volume customers' bills, which they have no ability to control, right? If they use less, they're still paying that same fixed charge. This is all things that you have all studied over the past few years and probably you're well aware of. I think the purpose of this discussion is to understand from your perspective, what are the priorities, the objectives from your perspective, so we can tailor the rate design such to try to accomplish as many of those objectives as possible.
Well, if I may sum up what we've been talking about here in the past couple of years, is we have a very heterogeneous breakdown of our ratepayers. We have a small district, number one, which has challenges, but we also have a wide variety of people who are everything from the retired single homeowner right on up to institutional and commercial, large commercial. So we've got a lot of different types of use within the district. Yeah, Jason, yes, please.
Yeah, I think one of our major goals and focuses for this, David, was to have a picture of what full cost recovery looks like. In order, are we putting enough away in reserves? Are we hitting our debt limit? What do we need, like you said, in that 5-year forecast, and even beyond that, to be sustainable? And then we can back in maybe to the different classes of users that we have and look at maybe a restructure in that regard if things become too burdensome in our current structure.
Yeah, especially considering that we're undertaking a bunch of debt right now to do a bunch of much needed improvements. So that's changing our debt load, and we need to be looking ahead to how we're going to manage that.
What do we escrow now? What do we charge? What do we charge over the operating expenses? I thought that I looked at that.
We're generating about $400,000 a year over operating right now
Okay,
with rates alone.
so that's on like 3
And
million?
that was part of the 2019 increase.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And so that's part of the 3 million, so it's like 400,000, 430, what about? 9%?
Right, something like that.
yeah,
So that's where we're coming from now, 10%
right.
over the, okay.
Yeah, and that's a good position to start from, rather than, some of the utilities that I begin working with are under recovering at the basis, and they're still facing a significant capital improvement plan, which you are, right? I mean, in total, from 2022 to 2026, the CIP that was presented to us, you're looking at over $30 million in capital reinvestment.
Right.
That is not an insignificant amount of money to pay for. And so, yeah, Jason, you're correct. Obviously the two components that I outlined, the financial planning aspect and the rate design aspect, the financial planning is paramount, right? Generating enough revenue on an annual basis to fully pay for all your costs, that's paramount. But I think, although not equally as important, but important, especially with regard to the potential customer impacts, is the rate design. And so it was meant, you do have a very heterogeneous customer base. Is there a particular customer base that I guess the board is more concerned about than others with regard to potential impacts going forward?
I think, if I may speak, we're concerned about all of them. We want to be fair and equitable to everybody. But we have an aging population here in town, and we also have many institutions. How do we separate this out so we treat them fairly? In other words, should the institutions be paying a little bit more or a little less? Should the residential customers pay more or less? I mean, how would you divide them up?
That's a great question. So typically, to answer that question, the best way of getting at that, although folks typically don't like the results, is to perform what is referred to as an allocated cost of service study. And so what an allocated cost of service study does is it takes all of your costs, and we typically pick a test year with actual costs, and we'll divide those costs up based on, we call it a FAT analysis, functionalize, allocate, and distribute. So we will first ask the question, why are these costs being incurred? Are they incurred for source supply related issue, for transmission and distribution, for pumping, metering, fire protection, customer service, administration? And then we will distribute those costs to different customer classifications. So say a single family residential or residential, commercial, industrial, institutional, based on the contributing factors of those different customer classes. And the way that, and this is mostly on the water side that I'm speaking here, the way that those costs are distributed to those customer classes is typically through their peaking characteristics. And by peaking, I mean really the volatility in their consumption. So a lot of times industrial customers, and this is not an across the board fact, but typically industrial customers will use water fairly steadily. They don't have sharp peaks, whereas residential properties will typically have very significant peaks, especially on a daily basis. You see some peaking at 7 a.m. in the morning when everybody's getting ready for work and school, 7 p.m. at night when everybody's doing dishes, washing clothes, taking showers, baths, things like that. Even on a weekly or monthly basis, just dependent upon weather, we see a lot of fluctuation. That fluctuation in the demand requires you to size your infrastructure and your system bigger than it would need to be if everybody used water very steadily. So those costs that we can allocate associated with extra capacity, so peak hour demand, max day demand, Fire protection is also included in this, which is typically a significant portion of the cost that you're incurring on an annual basis. We will distribute those costs out to the different customer classes based on their peaking characteristics. So those customer classes which are peaking more will typically pay a higher volumetric rate than those customer classes that are peaking less. The problem with this is, although that results in a more equitable rate structure, more often than not when we perform these analyses, what this determines is that residential customers are not paying their fair share and should be paying more.
Is an apartment building residential customers?
The opposite of our assumption.
A small apartment building?
Right, that was based on the average daily, not the peak.
Yeah.
So it would depend on the size of the apartment building. Typically categorized in a residential, truly residential, more in the lines of a single family residential home would be something 1 to 3 units. So a single family, a duplex, or a triplex. Getting outside that would be considered a multifamily property, and a lot of times those are actually lumped in with a commercial class. Or there are communities which have a multifamily rate. I know some communities that I work with have a residential rate, a multifamily rate, a commercial rate, industrial rate.
What do you do
It all
with this?
depends on how we determine the classification. Trying to get to a more, given the heterogeneity of the customer base, trying to get to classifications that lump customers together to have those classifications be as homogeneous as possible. Is that going to be perfect? No, it's never perfect with regard to rate design and cost of service. I mean, you could think of just the single family, if we could hone in on only single family residential homes, there's going to be heterogeneity within those homes as well. There's homes that are watering their lawns very frequently. There are homes with just a single person living alone. There are homes with 6 people in them. Those single family residential homes, although they might be a little bit closer than the entirety of your customer base as a whole, they're using water very differently than one another. So this is, it will never be a perfectly equitable system. The closest thing that I've ever seen to that is some utilities in the Southwest, and they're doing this predominantly because they're quite literally running out of water at times, is they implement something called budget rates. Well, they were where they will actually set on a monthly basis individual rates for every single property in their system based on how many people are living in their home, the square footage of their home, the square footage of their grass around their property, the season, the consumption potentially in that or the rainfall in that year, and we'll reset that annually. That's never going to happen in New England, or probably not in my lifetime at least. But that's as close to a perfectly equitable system as we can get to. But that's such an administratively burdensome process and very, very costly to maintain a system like that.
Right. Well, we have a university in town with a lot of large buildings, for which we maintain a fire department, which we wouldn't if those buildings weren't there, which requires us also to have a lot of water on hand for fire protection. I'm kind of curious.
Absolutely. How
big is fire protection as a factor here? I mean, because the university is a class of itself in this town because of its size and the size of the buildings, the height of the buildings, the number of occupants in many of those buildings. How do we even begin to understand, or does fire protection weigh in heavily in that regard?
Great question. Absolutely. The answer is absolutely. It should weigh into the equation. Typically, fire protection, the costs associated with fire protection are typically recovered in 2 ways. One from public fire protection charges that are typically billed out based on a per hydrant basis, and then private fire protection charges for the university, for example, some other industrial properties. Even now we're seeing some single family residential homes have sprinkler systems. There is a significant cost that you all have incurred and continue to incur on an annual basis to be able to provide the demand necessary to respond to a fire event. fortunately, hopefully that never happens, but if it does, you have the capacity to respond to it. And just like I mentioned earlier, with the sizing of the infrastructure to be bigger to respond to those peak demands, the infrastructure needs to be even bigger to respond to those peak demands as well as a fire event at the exact same time. And then there's a significant cost associated with that. Typically, for smaller systems, doing a cost of service study that allocates a cost of service study, it can be anywhere from 20 to 30% of your annual revenues that should be coming from fire protection alone, both public and private.
Wow.
And then those within the private side, so for example, the institution or institutions, they would be assessed a fixed fire protection charge. Typically, the predominant method for recovering those charges is based on the line size of the fire line size coming into the property. So this could be for smaller properties, a 1-inch meter. Typically, standard is somewhere in the 4 to 6 inch range, and this will be assessed on sometimes an annual basis, sometimes a quarterly basis, a fixed charge to reflect that cost that you're incurring for fire protection. And their fire protection charges are great for 2 reasons. One, they are cost of service justified. They're equitable. They're charging the people who are most benefiting from having fire protection systems rather than spreading the costs out amongst all other ratepayers who are not directly benefiting from that. Potentially not the public fire protection, it's a public good to some degree, but those private fire protection charges, if they have sprinkler systems installed in their properties, they are having a direct benefit from having that fire line be able to service them in the unfortunate event of a fire. And as such, it's reasonable to assume that they should pay the costs associated with that. So that's not getting spread out to the rest of the ratepayers. So it's cost justified. Also, a benefit of it is it's incredibly stable. Again, they're fixed. They're not based on the water that's actually being utilized during a fire event or only when that fire event occurs and the water associated with it. That revenue is coming in on a quarterly or annual basis regardless, because of that cost that is always there, that demand, that readiness to serve for a fire event. So in my opinion, they should absolutely be taken into consideration and probably pulled out and charged separately.
Yeah, well, one would think for a lot of people, it's saving them money because, your insurance should go down if you have the sprinkler system.
Yeah, right now we're generating about 6% of revenue through fire protection rates.
Okay.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Hey, can I say something?
Yes, please.
You say you're going to have a difficult time getting an equitable situation because that's kind of tough. And so I think the next thing is that you would do your number crunching of finding out what the cost basis is here and this dealing with the peaks and all of these variables and come up with enough numbers and costs that the whole thing comes clear.
I missed the first part of that, but I think I understood the gist of the comment. Sorry. Yes, that is. I performed a back of the envelope calculation already, and at least with regard to fire protection, you could be recovering probably 4 times what you're recovering currently from fire protection charges, which would significantly offset the need for rate increases on all other customers. Now that's a benefit there. With regard to the actual cost of service in peaking characteristics and the distribution to different customer classes, I think we could do that, but an intermediate step would be to potentially just do some sort of rate design that is reasonably recovering all of your costs in a reasonable manner and see what the impacts are to different customer classes before getting into that detailed analysis, which I can almost guarantee you is going to show that residential customers should be paying more than non-residential customer classes.
Seems reasonable.
Have you looked at, you've looked at some of our data so far, Dave. Have you seen any trends seasonally?
You don't have, well, if you take COVID out of the equation, which really threw a wrench in your consumption characteristics, if you take that out of the equation, you don't typically have a ton of volatility in consumption, at least comparative to some other communities that I'm working with that see significant fluctuations in their volatility from season to season or month to month or year to year. Again, taking COVID out of the equation, but that was an absolute anomaly, and hopefully we're not dealing with that anytime soon.
Okay.
Or a situation like that, at least.
Yep.
So, I mean, that leads me to believe that from a pricing objective standpoint, what we hear from most of our clients are kind of concerns with regard to how things are operating in the system, and then that gives us a little bit of a framework for how we should design these rates. The things that we hear most often are revenue stability, and by that I mean having predictable and stable revenue streams predominantly coming from fixed charges. Given that you don't, taking COVID out of the equation, you don't experience a lot of volatility to where you need a significant portion of your revenue coming from fixed charges. Another that we hear a lot is affordability for customers. And mostly what we hear is that affordability concern is mostly driven by concerns on residential customers on the low end of the consumption scale, which does not necessarily correlate to actually low income. We've done studies in the past where we've looked at consumption records correlated with low-income customers. I mean, a lot of times those low-income customers are actually using water that's a little bit above what the average is for a typical single-family residential home. Now, there's a few reasons why that could be, overpopulated households or older homes with less efficient fixtures, things like that are just driving that not going out to eat as much potentially and using more water for cooking purposes. There's a lot. So there's a lot of times this perception that low income means low volume, and that's not always the case. There could be low volume customers who have no affordability issue whatsoever, but we have been hearing more and more about affordability in the industry and how to potentially provide some relief to customers, especially on the residential side. Not necessarily affordability for all customers, mostly on that residential side. And the other pricing objective we hear quite often is conservation, is trying to incentivize the efficient use of the system's resources. Now, it's I guess great from a motherhood and apple pie standpoint to conserve, but if customers conserve too much, your revenues don't hit where you think they need to be, and then you're in a position where you have to raise them even more to recover the exact same amount of revenue to cover your costs.
That was my question, was consumption.
Right.
Our consumption numbers right now are, I would say, in the high range, right, comparative to other systems around this area. So we would be hitting that conservation target at this point in time. But if we start charging more in the fixed rate, that would come down potentially correspondingly, right? So there'd have to be a balance there at some point, how far you lower the consumption rate and transfer some of the revenue into the fixed rate, right?
That's exactly right. So all of the options which we will, I was going to say all of the options that we will present to you will be revenue neutral. By that I mean they will recover the exact same amount of revenue, unless we're looking at options where we potentially push out a capital improvement plan or spread the capital improvement plan out. That will require different levels of revenue, but assuming the exact same amount of revenue recovery amongst options, they will be revenue neutral. They will, at least from a theoretical standpoint, recover the exact same amount. So yes, you're exactly right. If we were to increase the fixed charge more, that would allow the volumetric charge to not have to increase as much as if we just did an across-the-board increase to all rates and charges by the same percentage increase.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've been through some of those preliminary exercises looking at this. So I think we're kind of ready for the next step now, right?
I think so,
Yeah.
but I didn't want to unilaterally provide results to this group without having this discussion of at least giving you the opportunity to convey to me, what some of those concerns were, and something, if there was anything that I absolutely needed to take into consideration before we got too far down the road and did too many analyses and provided recommendations, and I give you those recommendations and you say, oh, you didn't take this into consideration, or this is a major concern of ours. Not hearing that, at least thus far in that discussion, yes, I think we're at that point, Jason.
All right, great.
Well, there's one other thing I'd like to bring up, and that is, I'm forgetting exactly what year this took place, but we had a rather large bump in our rates in 2019, and
Yeah.
there was another before that in time, and I think there's a
2019.
yeah. So I think there's there's a perception aspect of this too. We're in an inflationary period. I think there's a little expectation that maybe rates should, reasonably would go up a little bit, although, arguably that's not the way we set our pricing here, but I think I'd like to see a stabilization of increases over more than 5 years. I don't want to hit the end of 5 years and say, oh, we gotta bump rates up again, because we didn't think of X, Y, or Z. I'd like to, set a course here, chart a course that softens the bumps, any potential bumps, big bumps.
I could not agree with you more. I'm not a fan of having, an increase just once every 5 years and then having another significant increase. We've typically found that leads to rate shock for customers. That's when,
Right.
Rather than having a 15% increase and then not having a rate increase for another 4 years or another 5 years and then having another 15% increase, just increase your rates 3% every year for 5 years. All other costs for customers are going up. They get more, they're more aware that rates are increasing. They're expecting that. They can budget that. It's easier to, it's an easier pill to swallow or smaller pill to swallow a 3% increase and a 15% increase. It also helps just from a cash flow perspective for you to just compound those increases over time, give you that financial sufficiency, and smooth out those increases and have them be as predictable and stable for customers as possible. So I could not agree more. I'm a big fan of annual increases. Your costs are not going down anytime soon, so they will always be justified. But if we can mitigate those annual increases and smooth them out to the greatest degree possible, and that's when I think it's much more palatable for customers, it's more palatable for the financials of the utility. There's a lot of benefit there, and it's not putting you in a position where you're just kicking the can down the road until you absolutely need that rate increase, and that's when you're typically looking at those significant. For example, I had to give a city council presentation a few weeks ago where we had to recommend a 35% rate increase. Somehow I sold it very well and we got unanimous approval, but it was not an easy process, and it was it was difficult. Rather than they hadn't had a rate increase in about 5 years, and if they've just been having more really inflationary, or at least rate or water inflationary, which has been more twice the rate of inflation for the last 10-20 years. They would have been in a much better financial position than they were at the time. So I'm in complete agreement with that. I also think it's important to, although we might have a 5 to 10 year financial plan with the annual rate increases forecasted, I don't think that's a set it and forget it type of thing. At the end of this engagement, you will be provided with a non-proprietary financial planning model in Excel. We'll provide some training for you, whoever is going to be keeping that model. It should be updated annually as things change, which they will change. There's going to be a new capital improvement that pops up, or a capital improvement you were planning for to happen in 2025 is not going to happen until 2026. At least on an annual basis, that should be updated customer information. A new customer moves into town, or a significant customer from a consumption basis. Those things should be factored in just to make sure, just to pressure test it. If you're still on the same track, that's fantastic. You don't have to deviate from it, but we just want to kind of pressure test where we thought we were going to be versus where we actually are at that time, such that, if you do need to make an adjustment, and hopefully that's actually an adjustment downward on those rate increases, you can do that. But it should be updated annually. It's a living, breathing document rather than something that gets set in stone and not looked at again for another 5 to 10 years.
Well,
We're on the same page with that one.
short of trying to solicit a microbrewery to move to town to start drawing a lot of water, I think we've covered most of the possibilities here.
They'd be looking for a volume discount though.
Yeah.
If you do that, I'll come up there for an in-person meeting next
All
time.
right.
Yeah, I worked with the city of Richmond, Virginia. I don't know if anybody's aware of Stone Brewing Company. They're headquartered out in California. They ended up putting a new facility into Richmond, Virginia. It was one of their satellite facilities, and they were looking for a discount on their wastewater rates because they said that the processes that they had and the waste that they were sending back into the system based on the brewing was actually good for wastewater treatment, and they should be the city was actually benefiting from that. So I was actually in favor of giving the brewery a little bit of a discount. I was hoping maybe I'd get something out of it, but I didn't.
Right. Well, I think this was a worthwhile presentation. So,
Next steps?
Next steps. What are we looking at here, please?
So how often does this group meet?
Once a month.
Yes.
Once a
Okay,
month.
so I would think, if I don't know what your next meeting looks like, but if I could get on that meeting, and I'm happy to come up there and give an in-person presentation, or even potentially, even if from open meeting laws, if it needs to be a public meeting, that'd be fine. A separate workshop or something, so maybe we can get into the details a bit more if that's a better forum. You tell me, but I would think we'll kind of distill some of what we heard today, which isn't deviating much from what I already thought I knew. So thank you for confirming that. But we'll put together, a handful of options. I think option one will be status quo, you're not changing anything. This is how much additional revenue you need annually to be able to support your revenue requirements or your costs. And then scenario maybe 2, 3, 4, depends on, we don't want to inundate you or give you too many options to chew on, but, really just distilling down what we think are the best options for a revenue recovery perspective, from a revenue recovery perspective. What are those options in terms of rate design, things like higher fire protection charges, fixed charges, maybe customer class-based volumetric rates, and importantly, why we would potentially move in that direction. And then even more important than that is something that we're going to have to justify, or what are the customer impacts associated with making that change? Who's going to benefit from this change? Who's going to be hurt by this change? And can we justify that going forward? And does it accomplish our goals? And like I said, whatever the best form is for that discussion, I'm not sure if you would be open to more of a workshop if this isn't the best form to do that. I'll leave that up to you, but that would be, I think, the next step.
Okay.
Well, great. Yeah, I think that gives us some time to decide what format presentation we're thinking about, but we thank you for the time today and this opportunity.
And reach out, David, if you need any other information as well, and put all that together.
I will. I think we have quite a bit. I think we have pretty much everything we need. But as we're getting into some of the details here, running the scenarios, if I have any questions, I'll make sure to reach out in the interim.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, David.
My pleasure. Thank you for your input. I do appreciate it, and look forward to showing you some preliminary results soon.
Very good. Excellent. Good evening.
Have a good evening. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, so at 10:06 here, let's back to our new business. We've got a bunch of things to go through. The next up is Wright Pierce engineering contracts. We have a pile of them here, and by and large, most of them were modifications to include some new language. This is language that Don Jutton had proposed that was we thought improved protections, right, for the district as far as milestones and deliverables and bill and invoicing and whatnot. So we've got Highland Street, $293,000 for this contract. Russell Street, $80,000. Emerson Street, $64,000. Reservoir Road, $123,000. Wastewater Master Plan, pump station evaluations, so that's $100,000 grant, okay. And then lastly, this is Main Street Phase 1.
Amendment number 2.
Oh, amendment number 2, yes.
No change in value to the contract, but it's just added the language that we wanted in there.
Okay, so no change in the contract value, just the new language that I mentioned. So we need a motion to authorize, presumably me.
So you want to approve them and then authorize the chair to
Right.
sign tonight?
Yes.
And documents going forward.
Oh, yes, right, and authorize me to sign other contracts related to these projects going forward.
I would move that.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, okay. And I'll get to that signing in a minute, but let's keep things rolling here. Authority to borrow, 3 forms we have in front of us. Lead service line replacement, 100% loan forgiveness. We are authorizing me to sign these documents, authorizing Kim to sign as a record keeper. That's a little bit different than we're used to having with documents. So this is NHDES. So this is regarding ARPA funding. Number 2 is Reservoir Road application, ARPA grant. And then thirdly, Holderness Well. So all the same here. Approval of these signature for me to sign these documents, and then authorizing Kim to sign as record keeper.
I'd move that.
Second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye all around. All right, so David Fox we've done. I'll sign while Kim is doing a presentation here on business manager items, personnel policy update. I know Paul had asked about this. Yes, we want to hear a little bit about
Yeah.
changes there.
Jason and I, towards the end of 2022, began making changes to the personnel policy due to the fact that the commissioners had changed our PTO, our paid time off policy. So we used to have sick time, vacation time, personal time. It's all been lumped into one bucket. And so there's multiple changes that needed to happen in the personnel policy to be sure, one, to satisfy the auditors when they're looking at the breakdowns of what we allow people for leave time. So we began working on that at the end of 2022, and we changed most of the PTO items. And then with the change in our various roles and the change in the district administrator position, we need further changes. So Jason and I think are on the 3rd edit. But we do know that there's a few more things that we need to do a full workup and make sure that we dot our i's, cross our t's, and
We're getting close though.
we're getting close.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a big document, so
It
I'm
is
sure
a
there's
large document and lots to make sure that every single category is correct.
Right, well, that's good, that's
So
good.
we'll be looking to bring it to you in the next month or 2, I think, for next couple meetings. We'll
Okay.
hopefully have it
Well, good.
prepared.
It's moving along.
That's all I have.
That's all you have? Okay, so then we're on to the superintendent.
Sure, give you a brief rundown.
I don't think it's gonna be brief.
Construction progress.
He said he'd try.
But, just to let you, give everyone an update on our construction progress.
Please.
We have completed the water bypass installation on South Main Street and on Old North Main Street up here. We have connected the residents to temporary water now on Old North Main Street, and they're starting to pre-dig some of the connections on South Main Street. There was a manhole installation on Main Street just south of the Rotary, which enables the pipelining folks to be able to line through that new manhole now and make that connectivity. At the railroad crossing, the water casing and sewer casing installations are complete, so they have restored the rail now. The track has been rebuilt as
Is
of
that by the bridge or this one up?
right at the end of Toby Road and Old North Main.
Okay,
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Yep, so that was back in place on Monday. We conducted a water shutdown for the common man in to tie some valves in up there on Monday night, last Monday night. The sewer main installation started at Bridge Street near the railroad, which is right next to the Enterprise Center. You saw there, one manhole structure has been replaced and they're starting to run the actual sewer line towards the north of the Rotary there. So they'll continue that next week and start heading up Main Street from there, hoping to get to Toby Road probably within a 2-week time frame.
Oh, okay.
So there'll be, at that time, there'll be one lane alternating traffic in that section of roadway.
So there is a method here to doing all this work in different places, and
Right.
it's not, you would think they'd start in one point and just linearly move, but
Yep, it was about 3 weeks ago now. We've did the large shutdown in downtown Main Street, and the purpose of that was to install 5 isolation valves around that core intersection so that we can keep water live to Holderness while we have actual Main Street on temporary bypass and some shut down. So we're able to feed from the tank up on Reservoir Road down to Highland Street to Green Street and then over to Holderness while we have Main Street on bypass. So we're able to control that and keep things going. So right now we have the under the river crossing here at the Baker River actually shut off, and we're only able to send water one way now to our tanks. So that's through the northern loop, we call it, which takes it down Fairgrounds Road to Cooksville, under the river that way, up through River Ridge to our 2.5 million gallon tank. So that's a critical area right now because we don't have the dual feed to keep that maintained and live, and hopefully, knock on wood, nothing happens to that section of town. But we're making progress every day, and the crew's been great to work with. We haven't received too many issues in town, and we haven't received, we've received quite a bit of good feedback from folks. So if there's anyone that has any issues, we'd urge them to reach out to either the town or the village district, and we can address their concerns.
So those additional valves downtown, those help in the future when you need to shut down if there's a break, or is that correct?
Yep, we can now isolate in 5 different directions, going north of the Common, south onto Green Street, or east onto Green Street, south onto South Main, and then also up Highland. So that was something that we lacked previously. When we had breaks on Highland, we had to shut down the whole extent of Main Street.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so that's, there are hidden benefits here.
Right, yes, it was baked into the design that way.
Oh, good.
Comments that I've heard from people in the town is that this construction crew, even though they're interrupting things, they don't have to wait very long. They get people through, and they're really concerned about people being able to move through the town. And I've heard nothing but positive things,
Great.
which is good to hear.
That is great.
Likewise.
That is good, since nobody likes interruptions.
Somebody wants to lynch us yet, right?
Yeah, so other than that, we're also continuing to work with David Savage and Katie Laval of CCS to forward our cybersecurity application. They've been back and forth several times this week on particulars in regards to the server and some of our protections that they're proposing. So that's been a great collaboration now, moving forward with both of them on the same page. getting to the application.
Yeah, let me say that as a technical programming person, I am grateful because it is a
wet
lot.
here.
Yeah, it is a lot to deal with. I'm glad we have two network people who.
When is that deadline?
The end of June.
End of June.
Right, so we're looking to apply for a cybersecurity grant to once again get some money that to help
Yep.
us improve our network and strengthen our network. So this is why we're going through this exercise, not just to buy shiny new equipment.
Right, it's critical equipment in
Yes.
what we do every day.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, good. So what else do we have? All right, so is that everything, Jason?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Purchase recs, we're going to go back to listing them out.
Those are the individual ones.
Yeah, these are the individuals.
There's
So,
a summary sheet, and
Right.
then all of the backup are there with them.
so by request, and I think it's a good one, thank you, Paul, so we're going to just itemize what we've specifically approved here recently. So we've all approved these. We do this electronically now, but just for the public record, for Rand's hardware, we had $430 for equipment rental. Cone Inc. annual service for elevators at pump stations 4 and 5. That's $1,042.32. Underwater Solutions Inc. This is for the scuba divers to inspect our water tank. And that was $8,780.
So what's that, all video? So what you-
Yes.
And
Yep.
cleaning, right?
And cleaning,
Inspector
they vacuum
Oh,
and
cleaning.
sediment out. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Squam Lakes Plumbing and Heating down in Ashland, $2,560.48. This was for repair of 2 heating systems at the
Relief
plant.
valves and an expansion tank.
Right.
Yep.
United Rentals Inc., $1,842.39. Looks like we had a telescopic boom, lift.
Lift, yeah.
Okay.
Hey, wait, can I just ask one? Hey, what's the expansion tank for $1,800? What the hell?
I asked the same thing.
What's that?
It is.
That was the expansion tank for our boiler system at the treatment plant,
Okay.
which was commercial grade, and
Wow.
it's a fairly large tank. Yeah, it's not like a small residential
Seeing as a
tank.
homeowner one is like $100, that caught my eye also.
Okay, good.
Well, I trust.
We did shop around for that too.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Three Lakes Landscaping, $6,220.
Two new ones that have been approved, just so.
That is for lawn care for the season for all of our pump stations and other locations. And then Green Mountain Pipeline Services, 40 hours of vectoring, $14,000. Bring that giant truck in. So that is the list of purchase orders. Oh, we need a motion to enter into record the purchase orders we have. Hey, please.
I'd make that motion.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Fine.
Okay, very good, all around there. Public comments.
We're all looking at you.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, I guess that's my cue.
Yes.
First thing, sometimes it's hard to hear, so I think I would get more out of it in person. But where do you folks meet? In some secret room underground?
Where are we? We're at the.
We're at the business office.
Okay,
Yes.
awesome. I will try and come out when feasible.
Yeah, we do allow
So-
visitors.
Say that again?
We do allow visitors. We're happy to have you.
Wow, that Rate Financials, what an interesting conversation. All the complexities around that. I
Yes.
had no idea. A little scary. But that's cool. And I just wanted to say, as a business owner right there on Main Street, Granisi's done, and everybody's done a fabulous job keeping things moving. I get why you do things in different places as opposed to linear. That totally makes sense. The flaggers have been great. Parking has been very clear, where you can and where you can't.
Yeah.
So as a business person, I just want to thank you. I'm less scared, yet I'm still scared. But I think that's better than I thought it would be.
Well, I mean, maybe Jason can make a general comment about, I mean, will the construction in the next few weeks start to move up North Main Street and be outside of downtown, or?
Yeah, so the construction within the next 2 weeks will continue on north of the roundabout, heading towards Toby Road. And then also, like we said, getting everyone connected on South Main Street to temporary water, and then they could start progressing there. So kind of the middle between Highland Street and the roundabout will likely be done last, so that may not be done until later on this summer.
Okay.
And then I know for our project too, we're also jumping in now on Russell Street as we've signed the contract for that. So my understanding that that'll take place sometime this summer as well.
Nice.
Yep.
That's awesome. Well, great work. Thank you. It's much appreciated.
Okay, well, good. Well,
That's all I got.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mary Ann. Thanks for the feedback. And I think that is, next meeting is Tuesday, June 13th. Same time, same location, and I believe we've covered everything.
Yep, move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, 6:07.
Aye.
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 Very good. Nice and fast. Thanks.